Thanks everyone for joining us. This is Stanford Transportation's webinar, How to Fix a Flat. As I was mentioning to Robert when we hopped on the call, this is our webinar number 16. So we thank you for everyone's participation and interest in learning more about bike safety. So I'll turn it over to Robert and we'll get started with the event.
I think we have introductions if you want to do those, Ariadne.
So welcome, my name is Ariadne Scott. I'm the Assistant Director of Active Mobility at Stanford. I manage the Stanford Bike Program. I've been with Stanford for over 10 years. I think everyone knows we're a bicycle-friendly university designated by the League of American Bicyclists. We were the first to be recognized at the platinum level and just received last year our third renewal. I've been car-free for over 20 years and I serve as a board member for the People for Bikes Foundation. I'll turn it over to Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert. I work for a local consulting firm, Bikes Make Life Better, which is our name and our core belief that bikes really do make life better. I've been working as a bike mechanic and generally in the bike industry for about the past 10 years. 5 of those with Bikes Make Life Better in a variety of roles, one of which is doing awesome classes for awesome people. And I was trying to do the math on this, but based on average number of tubes changed per day in my bike shop days, I'm pretty sure that I'm in the high hundreds to possibly 1,000 to 2,000 tubes changed thus far in my bicycling career. Fortunately, that rate slowed down somewhat now that I mostly do webinars, but the hands still remember. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to go through a couple of key points on how to fix a flat. We're going to talk about wheel anatomy, so the parts of your wheel, tire, tube, that whole system, what goes into a flat kit, and then of course how to actually change your tube or fix your flat, and then we'll do a quick introduction into how to patch a tube. So for wheel anatomy, right, this would be your whole wheel tire assembly. We can get it close enough for the virtual background to not clip out. I have to turn that off. So right, if you're looking at the presentation screen right now, from the outside in, right, the part that contacts the road is going to be your tire. On your tire, there will be a size. That size is specific to both the diameter and the width of the tire so that you can make sure that it fits in your bike and onto your rim, right? If your tire is too wide, it's going to hit your frame. If your tire is too big or too small in terms of diameter, it won't actually fit onto the rim. On your tire, you can see it in the cross section up here is the tire beads. All the interface between the rim and the tire works right on those wire beads. So if you're going to be putting the wrong size tire on, that wire bead just won't fit in the rim. It has to be pretty precise. The size of your tire is printed on the sidewall. It's usually an arcane string of numbers. On this one, it comes in as, let's see if we can see that there. Maybe, possibly, probably not. It comes in as a 50/406, which translated into imperial is a 20-inch tire by, so 20-inch would be the diameter, and then 2 inches wide. And it's also going to have, usually right next to that size, it'll have the pressure rating. So if you're putting your tire on and you don't know what pressure you're supposed to be at, look for that pressure rating, and then remember it's a do not exceed, right? It'll say max pressure, or it'll have a range. So on my tire, it's 35 to 70 PSI. For road tires, it's going to be higher. For mountain bike tires, it's going to be a little bit lower. And a lot of that has to do with the width of the tire. All right, so working in, so we've talked about the tire. Inside the tire is the tube. You can't see it in here because it's contained within the tire and the rim, but what will be sticking out is the valve. And so when you're going in to get a new tube, you want to bring your tire size, right? And then what valve type it is. So your valve type, there's two main ones in the bicycle industry. The first is Schrader. You've probably seen Schrader on cars, wheelbarrows. Most pneumatic tires use Schrader valves. And they're these kind of thicker, virtual background, disagreeable today. All right, there we go. So they're these kind of thicker rubber coated, usually valves that you see in automotive applications. Presta is the skinnier valve, usually without a rubber coating, and it'll have a little nut on the end. And that little nut is actually a safety feature that lets you lock the valve shut. So if you have a Presta valve and you've ever put a pump on it and you're sitting there trying to pump it up and it's just not going, take the pump off, make sure that nut's open, and even press it down a little bit to make sure that you've broken the seal on that valve and that air can flow through it. Quick Q&A, is that 700 by 43 measurement metric thin? Yes, it's actually an old French standard technically, but it's very loosely the metric tire diameter and width, with a little variation. The official ISO designation of a 700C tire would be 622, and that would be the diameter of specifically the rim where this tire bead's going to mount into it. So yeah, it is metric. Don't entirely base your, don't just go out and try to measure your rim and bring that number into a shop. Try to go off what it says on the tire, because that will be the most accurate way to find it, right? If your tire's on there, you know that works. All right, so Presta valves, just make sure to open that valve nut before you try to inflate or deflate your tires. Schrader is just a spring-loaded valve core inside there, so usually you don't have to do anything other than take the valve cap off. All right, so tire, tube, and then the rim. As I keep saying, the tire hooks into the rim using the beads. Right? They're either wire or Kevlar, so they're designed not to stretch. So when you're putting on a tire onto the rim, right, you know you can't stretch that bead out, so you're going to have to work at it and do some, little tricks to get yourself that little extra bit of room to fit that bead on, right? So rim supports the whole tire all the way around, and spokes connect the rim to the hub. The spokes are crucial in maintaining both the stiffness and the true of the wheel, right? So if the spokes are not tensioned correctly, you're going to have a weird ride and your wheel's not going to last as long. All right, and then at the very center, there's the hub. So when you go into a shop, you're going to want to know whether you're looking for a tire, right? So if the outer casing's been damaged, if there's, just like on your car, if it's worn down to the threads that make up the casing, then you're going to want to replace that tire. If you've skidded while braking a bunch and there's one spot that's worn bald, then you would want to replace that tire. Or if that tire's just been sitting in your garage for 10 years and you're watching this because you're getting ready to get that bike back on the road, if you go out there and the sidewalls are all cracked, and the sidewalls would be the side of the tire, so not the tread, but just the soft side above the bead. If you get out there and the sidewalls are all cracked and rubber's flaking off, or you can see threads through those cracks, then that tire is degraded to the point where you're also going to want to replace it. Anytime you can see the threads that make up the casing inside of your tire, it's a good sign that you're going to need to replace it. Tires have about 5 to 10 year lifespan just sitting on the shelf, right? rubber, it'll degrade over time. Ozone breaks it down, and sunlight breaks it down. So if you've left your bike outside in the side yard in our warmer summers, it's going to have bad effects for the tires and all the other rubber components. All right. So right, what happens when you get a flat is something has gone through the tire, right? Through the tire into the tube, and it's punctured the tube and is now letting air out. There's a variety of ways this can happen. The most common one is something sharp, right? Nails, glass, goat heads. So this would be a puncture from something like a nail or glass, right? A little tiny round hole. These holes can be quite small. You'll be able to hear air leaking out of about a 1 millimeter hole. And that's kind of typical size for glass or goat head thorns, right? The environmental obstacles can also give you flats. Another way you can end up with a flat is by running your tires at too low of a pressure. So as you can see here, here's a good cross section. So this is our rim at the top. So we'd be looking at the bottom of the wheel where it's hitting the ground here. So if your tire pressure is too low and this tire can't support your weight going over a bump, and we see this if people hit curbs or go over train tracks, or if you jump off of a curb, right? It doesn't have to be a sharp corner you're hitting. If you have enough force going into a flat piece of pavement, you can still cause a snake bite, characterized by the two parallel cuts of the rim actually coming down, smashing the tire and tube together hard enough to split the rubber at those contact points, right? So one of the best things you can do to avoid punctures is to keep your tires aired up within the recommended pressure range. I'm about 6'1" and 200 pounds, so I tend to keep my tires at the higher end of that pressure range because there's a lot more of me to support when I'm riding a bike. If you weigh 100 pounds, you can run towards the lower end of that pressure range. You can play with this a little bit to find out what's going to ride best for you. In theory, you want about a 10% sag on the tire. So if you can measure the tire height and then sit on it and it deflects about 10%, you're in the right range. Really, if you just start at a high pressure and start letting a little bit of air out, you'll feel where the bike is comfortable because there's enough give for those tires to absorb small impacts, but it doesn't feel squishy or mushy, and you can't feel that tire bottoming out. When in doubt, air a little bit high because it's going to save your rims and it'll save your tubes, and it will save time because you won't have to air up your tires as frequently. All right, so those are snake bites. Snake bites, because they are two holes close together, tend to be hard to patch. The width in between rims tends to be just a little bit too close to get two round patches next to each other, and a little bit too far apart to get one wide patch across them. So oftentimes when you have a snake bite, it means you're probably going to have to replace that tube because they can also be quite large holes. All right, so you're on the side of the road. You have felt your bike get a little wobbly. It feels like it's not tracking properly. You know that one of your tires is going flat, right? You can check and see which one by giving it a squish. And if you can deflect your tire a fair amount, right, that's going to tell you which one's low. But you're going to want to find that puncture. And it's easiest to find that puncture while there's still air coming out of it. So if you're riding along, feel the bike start acting weird, pull over, and then first off, listen, right? If you can hear the air coming out, it's probably going to be a pretty big leak. If you've been riding along and you hear like the little pop and then you'll hear it Dopplering as it goes towards and away from you, pull over immediately as fast as you safely can, right? Because A, that tire is going to go flat quickly, and as it goes flat, you're going to lose control of the bike. Right, that tire is not going to be interacting with the rim and the pavement in the way you need it to provide control. And once you've pulled over, look for what's caused the puncture. So the first thing you can do is listen to where that air is coming out. If it's a smaller puncture, you may hear all the air coming out around the valve hole. That's just because that air is trying to find the path of least resistance out of the tube and tire system. And often the rim is a conduit for that and lets the air out the valve hole. So if you're listening to it and you can't really hear where it is, but it sounds like the valve, it's probably not the valve. Once you are on the side of the road, you can feel for where that puncture is, either by running your hand along the outside or when you take the tube and tire off the rim, you can feel on the inside and find in the casing where that debris came in. And then you can also look for that puncture. For that, right, as I mentioned before, these punctures can be rather small. So if you have a goat head or a piece of glass or a piece of wire, freshly paved streets will often have little bits of wire sticking up out of them due to shredded car tires. Those can create very small punctures. So what you're going to want to do there is pump up the tube a little bit while it's outside the tire, and then give it a little stretch and look for any sort of pinholes, damage to the valve, damage to the tube to try to find those holes. All right, finally, and this one is hard to do on the side of the road. So this is more of a, once you're back in the shop or at home, submerge it in water, right? This is sort of the classic leak test. If you air something up and stick it in a tub of water, bathtub, you can even do this with like a little quart pail, right? You'll just work through sections of that tube. Right, air it up, submerge it in water, and you'll see bubbles coming out of wherever it's leaking, right? And then you can take it out, dry it off, mark where that hole is, and then you'll be set to patch it. All right, this is optional. Professionally, I don't think this is optional, but if you can see, there we go. All right, my valve stem here is lined up with the label on the tire. And what that lets me do is say I get a puncture and I'm feeling for it. So I felt around inside the tire and I find that it's over here in the sidewall or the tread, but I've got the tube out of it. Where do I find my hole in the tube? I know that if my valve stem was lined up with my label, I can go 4 inches over from where my valve was and where the label is to find the corresponding hole in my tube. So that's just a really nice thing if you're doing your own tire changes. If you can line up your labels and your valve stems, it'll make finding those holes a lot easier. Most shops should also be doing this. It's just one of those nice professional things to do. So that's kind of the final way you can try to locate that puncture, right? If you can find it in the tire, then you can find it in the tube. All right. So your roadside kit, you may have a awesome little bag underneath your saddle, looks like this. This is about all the space you need for a pretty decent roadside kit for a road bike. Mountain bikes, the tubes are a little bit bigger, so you need a slightly bigger bag. But in here, I keep a set of gloves. I like to wear gloves when I'm doing flat repairs. You're riding over ground that who knows what's on it, and all that's on your tires, and then all of it gets on your hands. There's also brake dust and grease, chain grease and whatnot that you're going to get on your hands doing this process. So if you have them available, I know gloves are a little bit hard to find right now. If you have them available, throw a pair inside of your kit, and it helps keep your hands from getting super messy. And then when you get back on the bike, you're not going to mess up your bar tape or grips. All right. Also have a selection of tire irons, tire levers. a very poorly packed tube. And if you're going to leave a tube in there for a long time, I'd recommend don't just put it in like I've done here, just all loosey-goosey. It's going to come packaged up nicely from the cardboard box or in a little wrap. Keep it wrapped up, and you can either put like a little rubber band around it or use a little plastic wrap so that it stays together nicely and doesn't fall apart. Also, if you have it in there like this, and there's anything that's abrasive in your kit, it can rub up on the tube and cause a hole. Some people will put like just a simple plastic bag or a Ziploc bag around their tube to keep that from happening. I just make sure that I don't put, a sharp edged tire iron back in here or patch kit, that sort of thing, so you can fight it kind of from either angle. All right, and finally, I have a little patch kit. This one happens to be from Park Tool. They all work pretty much the same. They'll have a little piece of sandpaper in there, a little glue, and a variety of patches. If you're not a fan of sitting around and waiting for glue to dry, there are stick-on style patch kits. Those work fine. I view them as more of a temporary repair than a permanent fix because the pre-glued patches are less flexible than your tube. And over time, as your tube loses air and then you air it back up, and then it loses air and then you air it back up, that pre-glued patch can break loose from the tube. I've seen it happen a bunch, particularly if you're riding infrequently, and so your bike's losing all of the air pressure in the tube, and then you're airing it back up. If you are riding frequently and keep your air pressure at the correct level consistently, those pre-glued patches can last a little bit longer. But for ultimate longevity and repair, the glue-on patch kits, if you do it right, are pretty much a permanent fix. Tube, right? Make sure you've got a tube that's the right size for your bike. The best part about keeping a tube on you is, and even if you have nothing else, if you have a tube on you, if another rider stops by and they have a pump or a patch kit, they have a pump or tire levers, right? They can help you fix your flat. It's relatively easy to fix other people's flats if they have a tube. If they don't, then it means we have to patch your tube, and that becomes a longer process. Optional, if you have a bike with a Presta valve, is a Presta valve adapter, right? Most bike pumps are going to be Presta or Schrader compatible. So you don't need this if you already have a dedicated bike pump. But if you're going to be stopping by, say, a gas station where they're only going to have Schrader compatible pump heads, having a Presta valve adapter can be helpful. And to use that, you would open that valve on the end of the little nut on the end of the Presta valve so the air can come in. And then you would put the Presta valve adapter on. All right. If you don't open that little nut on the end, no air can come in, and so it just won't work, right? And finally, a pump. Your choices on pumps are wide and varied. CO2 canisters are also an option. I recommend pumps because you have an infinite supply of air, right? As long as you're pumping, you can keep getting more air out of it. CO2 canisters are sort of a one-shot deal. Bigger pumps move more air, so you have to pump them less. Smaller pumps are easier to pack and weigh less. So it's kind of up to you on how often you think you're going to be needing to change a flat on the side of the road, sort of what sort of pump would be appropriate for you. Personally, I like this style of pump where you have a foot peg, right? Get that on there. Right, so when you're using a regular pump, being able to stand on the end of the pump to hold it steady and then press down into the ground is a lot easier than using the kind of pump where it clips right onto the end of the tube. And you're having to pump using this kind of a motion instead of using your body weight to drive the pump. But that said, this style pump, about half the size, half the weight. So up to you. All right. So now we're going to get into the more demonstration-based phase of this. It might be a good idea at this point to switch from the presentation view to click my video and make it bigger. It'll make it a little bit easier for you to see what's going on. But I'm going to run through the steps really quick, right? So first, assuming we're doing this on the side of the road, you're going to be flipping your bike upside down. So you're going to want to grab your patch kit, pump, anything that you're going to want off the bike, because it's easier when it's right side up. You're also going to want to make sure that if you have lights, bells, reflectors, anything that's sticking up off the handlebars, GPS, your phone, take those off so that when you flip the bike over, you're not going to crush anything that is valuable to you. All right, then you're going to flip the bike over. A whole bunch of ways to do this. You can grab the handlebars, lift up the front of the bike, and let the rear wheel go forwards and kind of roll the bike over the rear wheel. You can grab it from the side, kind of roll it over that way. However you do it, be gentle, right? You don't want to smash your handlebars or seat into the ground, and try to, if you can, pick a good surface for this, right? Asphalt works in a pinch. Gravel, a little bit better. It's probably not going to do as much damage to your components. If you can do this on a freshly mown grass edge of a office park or something, super perfect, right? All that grass is going to sit there and keep from damaging your saddle or handlebars. So, you know, if you can pick your terrain, having it be level also really helps. All right, so you flip the bike over. Flipping the bike over makes it easier to remove your wheel from the bike. If you're in the rear, fixing a rear wheel flat, you're going to shift to the smallest gear in the back, right? The outermost gear. Farther away your chain is from the hub, the easier it's going to be to pull it on and off. And then for front and rear, you're going to have to release the brake. There's a couple different ways to do that we'll cover. All right. Then you'll unseat the tire from the rim, pull the puncture tube out, check for the culprit, patch the tube. Personally, I prefer for your first flat on the side of the road, just throw your new tube in there. Patching takes a little while, and oftentimes I find flats strike when you least want them, right? That's just the nature of the thing, and it's faster to throw a tube in there and keep going and then patch your tube later. All right, so patch or get a new tube, install it, reseat the tire, inflate the tube, install the wheel back on the bike, and then secure brake. And I would say the part that I wish we could cover more, but it's very hard in a virtual session, is installing and removing the wheels, right? When we do this in a physical format class, this is often the point where people are taking their wheels off for the first time. So if you're doing this, I recommend take your wheels on and off a couple times at home, right? And practice this whole process before trying to do it on the side of the road. You don't want to be finding out that you need a wrench to take your wheel off because you don't have a quick release on the side of the road. And there's a question in the chat. So tire alignment, right? This person took off the front wheel and then reinstalled it and then heard a noise when braking with the front wheel. That could either be an alignment issue, right? If you put the wheel back in and don't get it quite square in the frame, it could be to one side and rubbing on one side or the other of the brake caliper, brake pads. It could also be that putting the wheel in or out, you've bumped the brake, particularly on a road bike. They sit on a single pivot at the top and can move. So sometimes when you pull it out, it just moves a little bit and then sticks there, and then you put it back in and it's still offset. So it could either be the wheel alignment in the frame, or it could be the brake alignment to the wheel. So I would check and make sure that both of those are where they should be. If you have other styles of brake, that's a little bit less common. So V brakes and disc brakes, generally they're self-centering and you don't have to worry too much about how that about whether that brake is aligned to the wheel, just whether the wheel has gone into the frame accurately. All right. So like I was saying with the road brakes, here's a road brake caliper. This little bit right at the top, that's where it connects to the frame. So if you're rotated, let's say to the right, this left side pad is going to hit the rim before the right side pad. And right, that could cause your rubbing or dragging if you're hearing a consistent sound or a bumping noise from the brake as you're riding. It's probably one of the pads is too close and then it's contacting. All right, to make it easier to get your wheels on and off, brakes have brake releases. Calipers, road calipers often have a little lever like this one. You open this lever, those brake pads spread apart, you can get the wheel out. Cantilever, no lever. There's just one end that has this kind of a ball shape on it that indexes into the ear of the brake arm. For V brakes, it's very similar, except it's just this little metal arm captures this end of the housing. For all of these, if you're ever undoing a bolt, right, you can see on the opposite side, there's bolts. If you're ever undoing that bolt, stop. You're probably doing it the hard way. Almost all brakes have a quick release, right? So either this V brake kind of setup, the cantilever where it's hooked into the end, or a little lever, depending on your kind of brake, look for that release. Don't immediately go for taking your cable out, because then you're going to need to do a little brake adjustment after you get everything back together. If you're using the quick release, you release the brakes, do your thing, put the wheel and tire back in, put the brake back together, and it's right back where you left it. You don't have to change any of your settings. All right, so the fabled quick release. So quick releases, as the name implies, make it easier to release your wheel in and out of your bike. They have a lever that operates a cam. It's a little bit clearer on this side, and that cam tensions down on the dropouts of the bike to hold your wheel in. So this generates a whole bunch of force without you having to sit there and turn a wrench. To adjust these properly, you want the cam sticking about straight out. You'll tighten this nut until it just barely hits the other side, right? You don't need to like tighten it down, just barely finger tight, and then shut that lever. When you're shutting that lever, there should be force throughout its travel, and it should leave, right? It'll press the blood out of your palm, and it'll leave a little white mark. So if you press and then you look at it and there's a white mark, you've put enough force into it. If you're sitting there and you have to use all of your force and you think you're going to leave a bruise in your hand, it's too much. Just back that nut off a little bit, shut it, and do it that way. If it just snaps shut, right, you can just, no effort required, then your quick release is too loose. If you use the quick release arm as kind of like a wing nut, it won't get your quick release tight enough. You have to use that cam action to activate the quick release. If you just wing nut it down, your wheel's going to move in your dropouts, and that's not going to be a safe ride. All right. So we're going to walk through these steps. I'm going to try to do it on the wheel if you can see them. If you can't, feel free to follow along in the presentation. So toggle along. So, all right, first step, you need to let all the air out. If you've got a big flat, that step might be taken care of for you already. If it's a slow leak, right, and you want to get in there before all the air leaks out, you have to let the excess pressure out. So on a Schrader valve, you can use the corner of a tire lever to activate that valve. Presta, right, again, that Presta valve, the little nut on the end, undo that nut, just screw it out to the end, and then you can press it in and that'll let the air out. So I'm going to do that on this tire here. If you're on headphones, you might want to turn down the volume a little bit. This is going to make a loud hissing noise. Like so. All right, and we're trying to get this flat enough that we can pull the tire off the rim. All right, so it does have to be quite flat. I usually give it a squish and push it down, particularly on higher volume tires. So mountain bike tires in particular, you can have a lot of air still in there, even if it's at a pretty low pressure. So I give it a squish, make sure that it's relatively flat. All right. So on a Presta valve, you might have a valve nut. Some Schrader valves are threaded also. This would be, let's see if we can get this to show up right, an example of a threaded Schrader valve also. So you would undo the valve stem nut. All right, and here's where we get to the fun part. So you're going to need to separate the tire from the rim. And you want to do this in a way that doesn't compromise the tube anymore and doesn't require ripping all of your arm strength to do it. So the easiest way is with a tire iron, little tire lever. There's a wide variety of these available. I would recommend, right, many of your standard like repair kits come with these sort of cheaper, fairly flat, flimsy tire irons. And this is going to be potentially hard for you to see, but if you can see that, it's fairly flexible, right? I can grab onto this and I can bend it. That's what you don't want in a tire iron. If you grab your tire iron, you should not be able to flex it, right? It should be really stiff. And the reason for that is because this is transferring all of the force from your hand into this system. So if this is flexing all over the place, it's a lot harder to feel where you are in relation to the rim and the bead. It's a lot harder to get enough force in there, and it can, yeah, make it a lot less pleasant or unpleasant than it needs to be. So recommend, yeah, just a good stiff tire iron. This one's Pedro's. This one's Novara, so REI. They're $3 instead of $1. And these will last you a lot longer than the $1 version. They're also easier to see on Zoom. So yeah, stay away from the super cheap levers. But right, order of operations is you'll get the hook of your tire iron underneath that bead, lift it up and over the rim, and then you'll put in another tire iron and do the same thing, right? And we're trying to use our leverage to lift that bead up, right? So we're just getting under there and giving a little lift. On this particular tire rim combination, it's pretty loose. So I can actually just grab it and slide the tire iron around the tire, and it's going to pop off. If it's not that easy, right, then what I would do, I'm gonna pop this back on real quick. Right, you would use a second lever. Oops, the tires back on. Do our first lever. And if you line your lever up with a spoke, which you probably can't see on my black shirt, right, you can hook the end of the tire lever onto the spoke. That's going to let you hold everything so that you can grab your second tire lever, right? So now this tire lever is under tension and is being held by that spoke. And yes, by bead, it's the edge of the tire that sits under the rim. So, right, so if this is your tire, your bead's the very lowest edge where all that wire is. All right, so then you would grab your second tire iron. Again, you're using it like a spoon. So always hook the spoon underneath the bead. Go over a couple spokes, right? Lift and pop that over. And you can kind of keep doing this, right? Working your way incrementally around if you need to. Road tires in particular can require a very incremental approach to get everything apart. All right, so now we've got one bead off and we can pull the tube out. All right, so at this point, right, we still have alignment between our tire markings and our valve stem. So if you just pull one side of the tire off, you can pull the tube out partially, right? Listen for the flat, listen for the leak, and then find on the tire where that debris might be, right? And make sure that you can get it out. If you pull both sides off, that's fine, but then you're really relying on knowing where that tire alignment was, right? Making sure that your valve stem and tire label were aligned. All right, so you would pull this off, go through and check for your puncture. Right, when you find it, mark it, throw it in your bike bag, grab your new tube, and I'm not going to demonstrate it here because I've already got a perfectly good tube with a little bit of air in it. Right, if your tube is fully floppy, right, if it's like a new tube and it's all spaghetti and there's no air in it, that's a lot harder to put back into your tire. I like there to be just enough air in your tube for it to sort of hold its shape, right? It doesn't need to be a full circle while you're holding it, but you definitely want it to have enough air that it's round, you can hold it, and it's not going to be just this limp noodle that you're trying to fit back into the tire. When there's a little bit of air in it, right, that tube wants to sit up higher in the tire, and a common error when putting tubes and tires back together is pinching the tube with the tire iron. And so if you're getting under there and the tube's sitting down in the rim and you grab it, you can actually create a pinch flat by hitting the tube with the tire iron and pinching it against either the rim or against the bead of the tire. All right, so lightly inflate. Come back up to your wheel and tire. Again, if you're going for the super pro moves, line up your valve hole with the label on your tire. And the tire labels aren't often perfectly aligned. My valve hole's here, the label's here. On the side I can see, which is the drive side, it's lined up correctly. So, just make sure that you're lining it up. Usually the default is you line it up on the drive side, because that's the side you photograph the bike from. If you're a person who photographs bikes. All right. So right, you've inflated your new tube, like I was saying, just to give it enough volume to get back in there, push the valve through, and then you're going to seat the tube inside the tire. This is a pretty quick evolution. So right, we're going to take this. And so I've pushed the valve through the rim, but the tire's still out. I'm going to just take my tube and just shove it inside the tire all the way around, and try not to create any like kinks or twists in the tube while you're doing this. And having some air in there really helps with avoiding that also. All right, so we're going to seat the tube in the tire. Now we need to seat the tire onto the rim. So that just means that we're going to get this bead back inside the rim. So I like to just start about 90 degrees off from the valve, and then work our way. Right now I'm just squeezing that tire into the rim. Right, fingers are on the front, and then my thumbs are just behind on the rim. So my fingers are just grabbing that bead and pushing it straight into the rim. And right, I'm not trying to kind of make sure as you're going, this should be relatively easy. If it's not, check and make sure that you're not binding up on the tube, right? Just squish the tube back inside of the tire where it should be, and then keep going. And the smaller the bites that you're taking in this process, the easier it is, right? It takes more time, but it's a little easier. And if you're working your way around, taking those little tiny bites, oftentimes, like here, you can just work the tire back on, and it'll just pop right on. Sometimes you'll get to the end and you'll have a little section. I'm going to pop this back out real quick. A little section like this where it's not quite over the rim yet. You're going to be tempted to use your tire irons here. This is sort of the time where you can, if you really need to. But what I'd recommend is go back to the opposite side of the tire, find your bead, and squish it all the way down into the bottom of the rim, right? And then work around the rim doing that, finding the bead, just shoving it down into the middle of the rim. What you're doing is you're basically collecting a little bit of extra space and working it around back up to where you can pop that top little bit of the bead into the rim. If you can avoid using tire irons while reinstalling your tire, it greatly reduces the chances that you're going to pinch the tube in the tire and cause a flat. One of the Q&As is, you make sliding the lever around the bead look so easy, but I've seen people really struggle with that step. Any tips? Yeah, so my advice there is, if it's not easy, you probably need to do another one of the, slip the tire iron in, lever it, and work it that way a little bit farther. Because you're using the tire iron as you're sliding it to lift the bead up and over the rim. If there's not enough of it free already, then that sliding technique doesn't work. And that is more of an issue on road bike tires, very tight mountain bike tires, cruiser, folding bike, looser mountain bike tires. It's a lot easier to slide the lever on. So yeah, if you're sitting there and you're trying to slide the lever and it's not going, don't force it. Do another, grab a lever, pop the bead out, lock the lever to a spoke, grab another lever, pop the bead out, and you can walk those levers out until you can pull the bead all the way around. Also, if your tire's been sitting for a long time, it can get stuck. The bead can get stuck to the inside of the rim, particularly on older like Schwinn's 60s, 70s, 80s bikes, right? That rubber, as it degrades, will bond to the rim. So if you're really struggling with that part, there's a lot of factors that can make it a lot harder to do. So the fallback is always to use the incremental steps with the tire irons. All right. Screw the valve nut back on, and then you inflate the tube, right? When you're inflating your tube, right, the valve nut being on keeps you from shoving the valve stem you just got through the rim back out of the rim. So make sure that's on if you have it. If not, you can just put your thumb behind the valve and press down, right? And they'll keep, when you're pushing in on the valve, if your thumb's behind it, it can't go anywhere, all right? You want to make sure that the pump is in the open position. If you try to put the pump on in the locked position, it won't go and it'll just try to shove your valve out of your rim. So make sure your pump's in the open position, put it on, lock it out, and then you're good. And again, remember, press the valves. Little valve nut. This is closed valve. This is open valve. So once you're done inflating your tire, make sure you close the valve. If you're just riding around with the valve open, hypothetically, you could hit something and it could release air. Schrader, it's spring loaded and protected, so that's not an issue. Presta valves, it's all about the little valve nut. Make sure you close it after you're done pumping and open before you start pumping. All right. And then you install your wheel. Again, use your quick release as a cam, not as a wing nut. If you have a bike with nuts on the axles, you'll need a wrench to activate that. So don't think that all bikes have quick releases necessarily. Some have through axles. Consult your bike's documentation to make sure that you're doing the correct procedure for getting your wheel on and off, particularly if you have a nicer road or mountain bike. They may have a unique procedure. Bicycles are mostly standardized. All right. So I'm not going to go through the review in favor of getting into the Q&A, as we're coming up on about 7 minutes remaining. Yes. Patches. So we'll do a quick thing on patches and then Q&As. All right. So when you're patching a puncture, the goal is, right, you're trying to fix a hole in your tube by putting more rubber over it. To get that rubber to bond to the tube, you need to remove all of the mold release. So the mold release is when they make the tubes, they spray the molds with a release so that they can actually get the tubes out. And that keeps rubber from sticking to things. And it keeps rubber from sticking to rubber, and it'll keep your patch from sticking on. So you have to sand it down. And if you're looking at a new tube, you'll see it's relatively shiny. You need to sand it down so that surface is matte, right? You're taking the outer layer of rubber off, you're taking all that mold release off, and then you don't want to touch that surface with your bare hands or your gloves if you have any grease on your gloves, right? You want to have as clean of a surface on that tube so that when you glue the patch on, it can bond fully. When you're sanding, you want to make sure that you're sanding out an area that's larger than your patch. It's a little difficult to get your patch perfectly lined up on your puncture. So you want a little bit of wiggle room to land that patch. You also want to make sure that you're sanding out far enough that the edges of that patch are going to bond to the rubber as well. The glue-on style of patches, you can see it has this yellow or orange outer ring. right? It's because that patch is actually feathered out. So if you looked at it in cross section, it would be sort of dome shaped with thin edges and a thicker middle. That's so that when you're airing that tube up, those edges can stretch a little bit more and the center stays put. So because that patch can move a little bit more with the tube, it doesn't peel off the same way the self-adhesive patches can. So, right, sand out an area slightly larger than your patch, apply the vulcanizing fluid, right, your rubber cement, apply it in an area, again, slightly larger than the patch, wait for that surface to go matte. When you apply the glue, it's going to be glossy, liquidy. You want all the volatile solvents to flash off and that surface to become matte so that you can put the patch on and it'll stick. If you put the patch on and that surface is still shiny, that glue's still liquidy and it's going to slide around. And because that patch is designed to be impermeable to gases, those volatile compounds won't evaporate off. And your patch is just going to sit there and slide around and won't adhere. So you got to wait. It's the hardest part. All right, so then you apply the patch. I like to leave the clear plastic backing on and use the backside of a tire iron to basically shove that patch down into the rubber, and leaving the plastic on gives you a smooth surface to press against. Right, so you're trying to squish that patch on, get all the little air bubbles that might be underneath it out, and make sure that's firmly adhered to the tube. Do not then air up your tube with your freshly applied patch on it outside of the tire, right? Don't test your patch. What you want to do is, if you've got the plastic on it, you can lift it gently and make sure those edges are sticking down all the way around. That's it. Put the tube in the tire, put the tire back on the wheel, and then you can air it up. If you're airing it up outside, the tube's going to expand a lot more than it would inside the tire, and there's nothing to hold that patch on, and so you'll just split the patch off the tube. Inside the tire, right, the tire keeps that tube from expanding, and right, the tube is expanding against the tire, and the patch is in between the two. So what you're actually doing when you're airing up the tube inside of a tire is you're pressing that patch on and making it adhere better. So yeah, be careful on your steps when it comes to patching tubes. I like to do my tube patching watching TV late at night. It's not fun doing it on the side of the road. It's good as a method to have as a backup, but because it is a process and it takes a little bit of attention, doing it when you're flustered and trying to get things done can be a little tough. But yes, you should air up the tube a little bit before putting it into the tire, right? But not enough, right? Just enough to hold its shape, right? No pressure, just enough so that it's holding its shape. All right, now we're into the Q&As. I think we have a couple minutes remaining. So if you've got them, send them in. Q&A, my bike is old and needs a complete tune-ups. Any recommendations on where to take it? I believe the campus bike shop is a great option and is currently open. A lot of the local bike shops have very long leads right now for tune-ups and repairs because of the high demand. So I would say check out the campus bike shop. Give, if you're not close to campus, give your local bike shop a call and ask them. They may be able to point you, A, they'll let you know how long it's going to take. B, they might be able to point you to someone who has less of a lead. But also, there are mobile vendors, Beeline, Velofix, who will come to your house and do tune-ups and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of options out there, but most of them are call ahead and see what the wait time is going to be like.
I think we have just a minute to wrap up. I want to thank Robert for his mechanical expertise and heed his advice to practice before, because you usually get a flat when you least expect it, like in the rain or when you're late for work. So practice makes perfect. We're going to send out a complete list of all the questions and answers that were submitted. We'll send out a list of resources. We'll also send out the recording and the presentation. We want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank Robert too. And we look forward. We have one more webinar on September 11th. It's a 30-minute webinar on Bike 101, top 10 tips for new riders at Stanford. So if you want to get a quick tutorial on how to be a safe rider, please join us. And we'll capture the questions coming in because we're running out of time, and we'll make sure we include them in the Q&A. Thanks, Robert. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.